Welcome back, everyone. Our final presentation is Clinical Trials Program as a New or Expanded Service Line, presented by Tynan Kugler, Principal at PYA, and Rhonda Paz, Managing Principal, Clinical Trial Administrators. As a reminder, this session will have 3 polling questions. Attendees must respond to these polling questions within the allotted time in order to receive CPE credit for the presentation. If you encounter any issues responding to the polls, please send your answer in the questions pane, and we will document them for your CPE credit. Credits will only be earned for sessions attended in their entirety. With that, I'll turn it over to Tynan and Rhonda.
Thank you, Trevor. We are so excited to be with everybody today, and I think we are closing out the program, so great way to close it out. I'm honored to be joined today by Rhonda Paz. Rhonda has more than 30 years of clinical trials, research, program development, you name it, expertise, and she will be sharing some really great information today. So thank you for joining us. I'm going to walk us through some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. We'll talk a little bit about what we're seeing from a clinical trials perspective in the country from a number of different perspectives to set the stage and tee things up for what Rhonda's going to talk about. She's going to go into some detail about, the value of a clinical research program. So why shouldn't an organization embark down the path of having that particular program or enhancing a program that's already there, and what are some of the real benefits in particular from a financial standpoint that organizations can benefit from. No good clinical research program starts without really some fundamental elements of success, which Rhonda will walk through as well. And then we'll talk through, how do you assess the feasibility of implementing a program or expanding a program if you have one. So hopefully by the end of today, you'll have some good information to take away and move in a direction that helps maximize your program from a financial perspective. So we're going to jump right into the polling questions so that we can get a little bit of input from you all. Trevor, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. The first question is, what best describes your clinical trials program? Mature with a significant number of patients enrolled? Established but still growing? In its infancy? Or what clinical trials program? Remember, you must fill out the polling questions in order to receive CPE credit. You will have 30 seconds to answer. Thank you for participating in our poll. Now, I'll hand it back over to our presenters.
Thank you, Trevor. This is really great information. We've got a mix of participants that are in various different stages, and of course, the nice thing about what we're going to do today is talk through these items from the perspective of various different areas in terms of where someone is in their program. Rhonda, does this surprise you at all?
Actually, there's more mature than what I had anticipated. So that's fantastic.
Great. So we're gonna just set the stage here a little bit and talk about the landscape. none of this will be new to any of you, especially those with existing and mature programs. But we can't help ourselves but to just talk about the magnitude of trials and research and the various different kinds of trials and research that are out there. So every year, and you'll see in a moment, it's been growing. There's just an immense amount of financial resources that are put behind medical research, and it's coming from a variety of different organizations: federal government, private industry, other industry, or agencies that are interested in doing this. We'll talk through briefly each one of these, but one thing I think both Rhonda and I are seeing as we work with hospitals and health systems is, funds that are out there for research are continuing to grow. So it's consistent, it's stable. So it's a potential for a revenue stream that is clearly not going away anytime in the future. One of the things I think that COVID has really shown us is the value of clinical research and how making some investments in there can really pay off. One of the things I think when we were putting this together was really important, and the sort of the compelling reason for doing this presentation is really learning to think about how clinical trials can really be a service line, thinking of it as a service line for your organization. So it really can be an additional revenue source for an organization, but like any other service line, it has to be, have a good foundation, have good operations, be programmatically sound, have good support. And so some of those things are what Rhonda will talk through today. But the other really important, thinking of it is we really look at clinical research and say it really marries well with how hospitals already organize their service lines. So when you look at some of these different organizations that are designating funds to research, it really does nicely align with how hospitals and health systems have already set themselves up to provide care. So if you just sort of look at the big picture, NIH has a significant budget for clinical research, and that budget's growing. So there was an increase. The 2022 budget had an increase of almost $3 billion up from 2021. So, consistent annual growth, we're seeing it, at that highest level. And then through the 21st Century Cures Act, there's an additional almost $5 billion that will be infused over the next 8 or so years. When you look down at the top funded specialties, here's where you see that alignment with hospital service lines. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting in doing preparation for this was there was an article, and Rhonda, you may be familiar with this, but a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic, but Scientific American published this article where they talked about clinical research in cancer patients in particular, and you can see that cancer is the number one there. One of the things that they said was that 1/3 of cancer patients meet the criteria for a clinical trial with a new drug, but only 4% of those end up in one. So why is that in this article? And that was the National Cancer Institute that cited that. One of the reasons that this article stated was that many community hospitals, which is where a significant amount of oncology services are delivered, they lack the infrastructure, they lack the support, they lack the organization to actually provide those trials to the patients that are getting care in the setting, where most people are getting care. So academic settings, you can certainly get them, but as people, we know cancer is local. A lot of cancer is local. Having that access at a local level is one of the reasons that there is just a significant opportunity for continued growth and development. And Rhonda, feel free to jump in if I miss anything, or your experience can augment this. So the other area is industry-sponsored research, and it's a little bit hard to see on this slide, but again, consistent, stable growth. If you look at this trajectory, that top number is, there are about 330,000 registered studies, and that's just progressively gone up. When you look at the dollars associated with those studies, North America clinical trial expenditures are expected to be almost $6 billion. So those are just, industry, pharma, those are those organizations that are designating dollars to research. That's expected to grow to 40 billion by 2027. So significant opportunity. Another really interesting statistic was that when you look at the compound annual growth rate from 2021 to about 2028, that's expected from an industry perspective to be about 5% a year. So we're back to our stable, consistent growth, which of course is going to support hopefully the investment that folks are making into clinical research programs. And then the one final piece on this is really interesting. Due to COVID, there was really a backlog of industry sponsored trials. And that has, because of that backlog, has led to an increase in activity in 2021. And one of the things that we're seeing as we're seeing in other areas of hospitals and health systems is that as we move into 2022, we're starting to see more of a focus on how do we incorporate telehealth, other areas, sort of innovative approaches to research that maybe pre-pandemic were not as prevalent or maybe taking a little bit longer to come into play. So when we look at sort of private agencies, again, no surprises here, but again, just the magnitude of the dollars that are out there from organizations that have made it their mission to support some of these disease sites, which again align very nicely with those NIH ones and with service lines: cancer, cardiology, leukemia and lymphoma, neurology. I think these are ones that, at least in our practice, we consistently see some dollars going into. So that just at a high level gives you an idea of where we are and setting the stage. And I'm now going to turn it over to Rhonda to walk through the value proposition.
Excellent. Thank you, Tynan. As Tynan shared, the landscape for clinical research is ripe with funding, but beyond that, there's significant value to an organization conducting clinical trials. Next slide, please. It's what we in the industry, we refer to it as the halo effect, and you may have heard about that, especially if you've been operating a clinical research program. And the halo effect of clinical research brings strategic, quality, and financial value to an organization that's conducting clinical trials. And from a strategic and quality standpoint, an organization's image is enhanced as conducting clinical trials it's perceived by the general public to be providing cutting-edge therapies. You're innovative. They want to come to you. This can lead to an increase in market share, right? And also provide a differentiator when you're recruiting physicians. Because many physicians are looking for that, right? And whatever organization that they're going to, they want to know that they can conduct clinical trials. And when they can, that's something that's going to make your organization attractive to them. So it's also a way to maintain accreditations. There are certain diseases such as cancer, stroke, and trauma. Those are just a few, but they require clinical trial enrollment in order to maintain their accreditation. So there's a whole strategic and quality value there. And then, of course, there is a financial value in that clinical trials do impact the bottom line by creating donor opportunities. We've all seen the research institutes that are named after someone, or even that clinical suite that's named after someone. So a great deal of donor opportunity is there depending on what it is you want to accomplish with your research program. It also minimizes patient out-migration. They're going to stay because you have the whole full repertoire of therapeutic opportunities for a patient, not just your standard of care, but you're also offering, again, that innovative cutting-edge therapy. And then it attracts new patients for those same reasons. So it does create a new revenue stream, which Tynan was talking about earlier on when she was saying that it's a very viable service line in the right organization. And so that's really what she meant, is that that can create a whole new revenue stream for you. And now you're bringing in pharmaceutical and device sponsors, that funding into your organization. And the other thing to keep in mind is that many of the trials call for additional tests and procedures for the disease that's being studied. So that the impact on the ancillary services is that of increased volume. So the trials will certainly bring you research tests and procedures, but they're also going to still have the standard of care within the protocol as well. Next slide, please. So to further the halo effect, there was a national survey that was conducted by a healthcare marketing firm, and what it indicated was that nearly 90% of the respondents perceived that an organization conducting clinical trials was more innovative and higher tech, and over 75% felt that research was a significant consideration when they were choosing their healthcare provider. Next slide, please. So this all directly impacts the bottom line, as I was talking about with the halo effect when we were talking about the financial impact. And here, a study that was conducted by Kurt Salmon and Associates demonstrated that for every $6,000 in clinical trial revenue, an additional $60,000 is generated in standard of care. So a multiplier of 10, basically. Again, as I had stated earlier, the protocols are calling for extra testing with the research, so that's on top of the standard of care typically as well. Next slide, please. So now that we've talked a bit about the landscape and the public perception and the financial impact, let's dive a bit deeper into the nuts and bolts of what it takes to have a robust clinical research program. So there are foundational elements that are inherent in all successful clinical trial programs. On the left, this is, if I had to say that there was one key slide in all of this would be the one to take home, because this is what's going to tell you exactly what's required for the foundation, but also what would have to be put into place as well. So on the left side, these are the inherent features, things such as leadership support, specialty mix, physician interest, patient volumes. It's really a mix of culture and the available resources. The first question really that an organization needs to ask itself is, do you have a critical mass of specialties and patients, as well as the support of the physicians and organizational leadership to run the research operation? So those are the things that are inherent. They're not the things that you're having to put in place, what you have already. On the right side of the diagram, those are the infrastructural components, and those are the things that are needed to actually bring a research program to life. Am I hitting those by accident? Can we go back to the, foundational elements? That's where we are. Okay, great. So the right side of it there, those are the infrastructural components. Those are the things, like I said, that need to kind of be brought to life in the development of a research program. So there are things such as specialized staff and clinical trial administration, systems to manage the operation. There are clinical trial management systems. There are regulatory document management systems. Research is heavy in the document management sector for sure. You need to make sure that you're storing your documents, you're versioning them, there's change control. So there are systems that need to be in place to manage this in an effective manner. And then all of this is under the umbrella of research compliance, which you achieve that through adopting and implementing standard operating procedures. So a critical component of a well-run program is the financial management, not only to ensure that budgets are negotiated to cover the cost of the operation, but also that there's a steady stream of studies coming in. So you want your studies in constant motion. While some will be closing out, you want others to be opening up. And you want to make sure that you're advertising internally and externally to make sure that you've got that steady stream of patient enrollment going onto your steady stream of studies. A typical clinical trial does pay for all of the startup activities to get that study up and running, but thereafter, the payments are going to come based on the patients that are enrolled in the trial and how many intervals of their trial that they're going through. So a focused and strategic business development and marketing effort is really going to be key to the success of any program. Next slide, please. So I guess we're going to pause here, and I'm going to turn it back to Trevor to I believe, to take us through the poll.
Thank you. The second question is, with respect to a clinical trials program, our organization has struggled the most with leadership support, physician interest, operational compliance, financial management, or all of the above. Remember, you must fill out the polling questions in order to receive CPE credit. You will have 30 seconds to answer. Thank you for participating in our poll. Now I'll hand it back over to our presenters.
All of the above. Well, that's actually the right answer. Interesting. Really, the takeaway here is that at one time or another, most clinical trial programs are going to experience each of these challenges, and it's typically through growth and expansion that it is experienced, right? Or the solutions to those challenges are what's actually resulting in the growth and the expansion of the overall program. Tynan, did any of this surprise you?
No, I mean, it's interesting how, to a degree, it's pretty well evenly distributed for not the all of the above with those other elements. I mean, operational compliance and, financial management. I think, part of what we're trying to do today is, I mean, we could, as Angie said in the earlier presentation, you could spend hours on probably just one of these, but I think given the context of today's session, it's really how can we serve as a resource and help you today, help you think through some financial management opportunities. Because I think, when Rhonda and I started talking about this potential topic, it was, I'll never forget, Rhonda said, a clinical trials program should be something that is a financial positive to your organization. It should not be a financial negative to your organization. And if it's a financial negative, then perhaps one of those areas is where you have some room for improvement. So that was just really impactful when you shared that with me, and I'm glad to hear that we'll be able to help some folks with that.
That'd be great.
Okay, I think we're ready to move on.
Here we are. So, well, great. So now that we have a better understanding of the foundational elements of a program, let's look forward to how to measure the success of the clinical trial program. These are the top 10. There are a number of others depending on what your program's goals are, but these are the ones that you're typically going to measure for your research, to keep your finger on the pulse of your research program's performance. And so, how many specialties are participating? And do you have an anchor program such as oncology or cardiology? Those are typically your larger research programs. So if you have one of those, you absolutely can, just with one of those, start a very successful clinical research program and just continue building upon that and expanding into different subspecialties and other specialties. How many physician investigators are participating? Do you have 2 to 3 physician champions? So, physicians will say they want to participate, but there are always a couple that's what they do. That's their first line of defense, so to speak. They're looking for those innovative therapies to put their patients on. And so those are your rock star physicians that really put a lot of patients on your clinical trial. So you want to make sure you've got a handful of those. 2, if you have 1 or 2 that are really rock stars, you can still do really well. How many trials have been brought in and activated during this quarter or during this year? This will let you know whether your business development efforts are kind of keeping that program flush with trials. That's going to be very important because they do have a duration. They may run for 1 year, they may run for 5 years, but you need someone watching that from a business development standpoint so that you've always got trials opening and closing to keep your program active. How long is it taking us to actually activate these clinical trials? That's pretty key because that's what will keep you competitive in the market. And anything over 90 days, sponsors are typically considering that to starting to be getting too long. So if you can open a trial up within 90 days, then you're in pretty good shape. How many patients are being enrolled? What are the finances that are associated with that activity? And what's the work unit to staff ratio on all of this? You really want to kind of keep your eye on how much revenue is each staff member actually generating through the work that they're performing. And then it all culminates into the ultimate measure of financial outcome. If there was just one place that I was going to measure and look, it's obviously going to be the financial outcomes because that's going to tell me whether it's profit or loss. And this is what Tynan was getting to a bit earlier. And that is that, you know, outside of the program's startup runway, which, you know, everybody has to have some level of investment up front, get your program up and running, then the revenues are coming in and you're getting that return on your investment. It's offsetting the costs that you've already invested. You're breaking even, and now you may even be turning into a profitable operation depending on your organization type and what your organization's goals are. So basically, if at a minimum, you should be cost neutral. And if your organization is subsidizing your research program beyond that startup without a reason, like there are some organizations that say, you know what, we want to do all NCI cooperative group oncology research, and if that is your organization's goal, you're coming to that decision knowing that you're going to be subsidizing your research program to a great degree. So there are times when subsidization is reasonable, right? But it's linked to whatever your goals are. However, if you are, without that type of a caveat, if you are subsidizing that research program beyond the startup, then something in one of these metric areas is not performing as it should. And as I was saying, a really good manager, a good clinical trial program manager, they're going to keep their eye on this and they're going to report on these metrics on at a regular cadence, right? It's typically quarterly, so that they're showing leadership. What's the financial outcomes? What's the enrollment? How many physicians and specialties do we have active? And you're kind of monitoring that throughout the whole time. Next slide, please. So I know we covered quite a bit of information in a short period of time here, but what we have covered all comes together and points to an organization's feasibility for implementing or expanding a clinical research operation. Thank you. Yes, that's the slide. So what are the key components to assess when you're determining whether to embark on expanding or implementing a research program? Well, the first thing is the why, right? That's always the first thing. Why do you want a research program? And do you have the leadership support and the physician interest? Do you have the volumes, the specialty, and the populations? And what infrastructure pieces need to be put in place or enhanced to support a program or an expansion? Think back to that foundational element slide. Everything revolves around that. And asking yourself, do we have all the pieces and parts to do this? Or where are our gaps and what do we need to shore up in order for this all to come together? Next slide, please. So if you are considering a research program, you need to ask yourself, your organization, can we weather a 12 to 18 month time period to achieve our return on investment? And finally, are we coming at it from a solid platform of compliance? Because compliance underpins everything that you're going to do in research operations, from regulatory compliance to clinical compliance, following that protocol, to the financial and billing compliance. There is just compliance from, cradle to grave with research. It's just the nature of the business for sure. So, but with organizational commitment, having specialized talent at your disposal, and a clear measured strategy, a clinical research program is definitely a rewarding service line for any healthcare organization. I've run a number of research programs, and they were profitable research programs at universities, academic medical centers, and even community hospitals. And a well-run program actually brings an incredible amount of value to any organization. So that actually concludes my portion of the program, and I'm going to turn it back to Tynan, and I guess we're going to actually do a polling question again.
Thank you. The third polling question is, my organization would be more willing to participate in clinical trials if we better understood and could measure our ROI, our infrastructure was more robust, it allowed us to attract more high-quality providers, we better understood how to navigate areas of risk, or other. Remember, you must fill out the polling questions in order to receive CPE credit. You will have 30 seconds to answer. Thank you for participating in our poll. Now, I'll hand it back over to our presenters.
The anticipation.
Trevor, could you show us the results? Oh, there we go. Okay. So we're going to talk through, I think, each of these areas in a little bit more detail. I'm really curious to know what other, I mean, 40% responded that there are other issues. That would be really interesting for us to know, just for the future, or feel free to chat it, or let us know, because we certainly can try and address those as well. But I thought for a minute, and I think that's good, Trevor, we can go back to the slides.
I wonder if it's talent. I know that there's a staffing shortage across, in clinical research. We are clamoring for, great help in regulatory and clinical and the finance world, all specific to research. And so I do know that finding that talent is becoming a challenge.
So that's a great point, because that's sort of, I think, what we're seeing across just from a number of providers. And it's important to say that it's both on the clinical side, but also on the sort of administrative side as well. So we're going to use the rest of our time to, I'm going to ask Rhonda some questions that I've been thinking about, and potentially some that are geared towards the last polling question that we had, because we really want to get to what are some of the ways, sort of tips and tricks, and if you could take a nugget from some of these to apply, that's the ultimate goal. So first question, Rhonda, when does it not make sense for an organization to start or maintain a clinical research program? Yeah. And I'm going to amend that too, to say a research program, or to potentially discontinue within a certain specialty. So when would you not enter into or decide that you're going to have a clinical research program? and or when would you make the decision that it makes more sense to put your dollars to a different specialty or support a different specialties from a research perspective?
Right, right. So in general, I'm gonna point back to that foundational element slide in that if there's not a critical mass of patients, interested physicians or leadership support, right, all of those things on that left side, then if those inherent pieces that are required that are not there, then that's when you would not, right? So if you don't have the ample patient population in a particular specialty, if you're only seeing 20 patients a year in a particular specialty, well, that's probably not one that you want to, open up a bunch of trials in. I think the key is also right sizing that program. So once you even decide that you want to do it, you don't have to go straight on to that Cadillac version of an infrastructure, right? You can strategically pace that growth, and you can strategically activate your specialties by looking at the cases that you're seeing. And with cancer, right, we look at tumor registry, right? We look and see where are those cases. And if you are thinking that you have to invest $2 million into a research program, but you only have 500 cases a year, that's way out of the scope of what it is that you're going to want to develop. You're going to want to right size that program, and you're probably looking at less than a quarter of that investment.
And it's interesting because, we had a situation, actually, I think two this past year, where one of the things I know we're seeing, and you might be able to confirm too, is that there's a lot of activity between academic medical centers and community hospitals affiliating, and various forms of different affiliation. But one of the real benefits for that is access for the community hospital to clinical trials and that potential infrastructure. And one in particular I'm thinking about, we had a situation where the academic medical center was in a partnership with the community hospital, and there was a significant investment in the clinical trials program that the academic medical center was hoping that the community hospital would make. And one of the things that we looked at was, does it make sense for the community hospital to earmark a significant number of dollars to forward the collective efforts of both? But exactly what you just described happened is, in order to look and say, okay, does it make sense for us to take these dollars and continue to fund this particular approach, it was determined that it was better served for that hospital to put those dollars into shoring up its cancer program from a community perspective, and to work towards building that, so that within a period of time that investment could ultimately be made. But it just would not have made sense with the infrastructure, the operations, and the volume that community hospital currently had. So, I mean, is that something that you consistently see? Is that an issue that's a challenge from a community hospital perspective?
So it's not so much a challenge for the community hospital in terms of setting up the program. I think their challenge is kind of determining what it is that they want, what are their goals, why do they want a research program, and then how sophisticated do they want that program to be, right? I mean, many community hospitals are not looking to be doing heavy duty phase 1 research, but do they want to do phase 2 and 3 to offer their patients this mode of therapy? Absolutely. And I think that it really is organization specific. You raised a really good point too about the university and academic medical centers that are partnering with these community hospitals, because that's truly a give and take relationship. When a university or academic medical center are approaching these community hospitals, it's a way to help get their enrollment numbers up, right? So they're covering a larger geographic area, their enrollment statistics are remaining high, they're able to maintain their grants and their memberships. accreditations even. And so that's really the benefit to the university academic medical center side. And then obviously, as you were saying, the community benefit is they are now gaining access to studies that they otherwise would not have access to. The thing that's key there is having an operating agreement, though, so that it's really clear what that parent, if you will, is providing. Are they providing any services? Are they going to provide regulatory processing and financial processing and oversight and oversee the compliance pieces? Or is that community hospital going to be the one that has to work that into their business plan to make sure that they're bringing on that talent? So I think that there's a really fine line there, because you really have to be sure that it's clear what the roles and responsibilities are of each. Then you can put the dollar amount on it.
Well, I think it's going to continue just because of where we are. And, we talk about oncology a lot just because, we see significant growth in population and older population. And so that's certainly one where I know we've had some focused efforts around clinical research. So, one of the other things I think, again, participants are probably preaching to the choir a little bit here, but given that hospitals are really in a financial squeeze, continue to hear that COVID, has certainly had an impact, and organizations are having to, really think about where to focus their dollars. If you're a hospital, if you're an organization and you are having to really think through, financially where you're going to make some commitments, and you do have a desire to let's do the augment your clinical trials program first. If you are watching your dollars, trying to break even or earn, make a profit on your clinical trials, what are the sort of top 2 to 3 things that if you went in today to a program that had an existing clinical trials program, what are the top 2 or 3 things that you would look at and tell them to improve, augment, change to continue to provide that service without, financially impacting an already potentially strained environment?
Well, it's obviously having a strategically paced growth plan to drive expansion is key. But I think quickly it would be like an assessment. So what I would do personally is I would get in and look at the numbers, right? How many physicians, what specialties, how many in each of those specialties. And then I would very quickly bring in 2 to 3 what I call bread and butter studies, meaning a few trials that will get revenue generating quickly. For example, a biospecimen trial, a registry, or an observational trial. These can be operationalized very quickly without a heavy lift. And the eligibility criteria is typically simple, so it makes it's a really good fertile ground for rapid enrollment. And what happens there is now you're starting to get payment in to start funding that expansion. So you want to have the plan first, right? You want to kind of know where you're going, but then very quickly, knowing your numbers, quickly get a few of those bread and butters in so that you can demonstrate that you've got the finances coming in to bring it in. It all boils down to that business development piece again, too, that I you've got to make sure that you're constantly feeding that pipeline of trials on the front end, but also marketing them on the back end. And I think that a lot of groups miss that sometimes, that they don't feel that they have to market the trials and all of that, but that's what's going to get your enrollment up as high as possible. A number of the trials that are coming out now, they're competitive trials, meaning they're not necessarily putting a cap on the number that you can enroll. So if there's, if they're looking for 200 enrollees and they've opened up 20 sites, well, it's first come, first serve. If your site's really great, you could go ahead and put them all on if you can move quick enough.
So when you talk about marketing, do you typically see clinical trials programs have sort of their own marketing plan? and it's sort of an internal external marketing plan, because I think that's an area where I know I've heard you speak in the past to, it's as much about internal education as it is external education. And I think sometimes we get focused on potentially the external education and maybe forget about the internal piece of it. So how do you typically guide somebody from a marketing perspective to help further things along?
Yeah, so there is, definitely a partnership with marketing and all of this. It's not like a clinical research program should set up their own marketing unit. You want to tap into your existing marketing infrastructure already. But just like with other areas in a hospital or service lines where you're trying to do internal marketing, it's very similar in clinical trials, making sure you're circulating that active clinical trial list, right? And you break it down so that the specialists can kind of have it at their fingertip, whether it's online. Back in the old days, we used to have this little tiny notebook that they'd all have in their jacket pocket, and they could pull it out in the clinic and look up a study and see what was coming down the pipe. So, so certainly having notifications on a couple times a month, bi-monthly, going out, alerting folks, the physicians in particular, the providers, that these trials are available to their patients. Another way too is making sure operationally, because the marketing can only go so far, operationally you need to make sure that you've got the resources ready to screen those patients, and if they can proactively go in, you've requested a waiver from the IRB so that you can go in and look at medical records to screen for patients. And so if they're going through and proactively screening, and then they're approaching the physician saying, hey, Dr. So-and-so, you've got 5 patients coming in today with this particular disease site that may be eligible for this trial. So certainly marketing, but then operationally proactive as well.
Helpful, very, very helpful. And I think my other question was, if you are in a financial situation where, and we've heard this, where, there are freezes, there are, not able to sort of go out and start new things, but let's say you you fell into the category earlier of, what clinical trial program, but we've convinced you that it's a really good thing to do for a number of reasons. And, you want to go back to your organization and say, back to your CFO or et cetera, and say, president, and say, I really think this is worth our time to explore. What would you say are the first 2 to 3 things that somebody embarking on a new program should do right out of the gate? I know we talked about all the foundational elements, but what are the top 2 or 3 things if somebody had to limit it to, that they would do?
Yeah, well, the very first thing they have to do is an assessment. They have to assess where they are in each of those key areas, because without the infrastructure, they're not going to be able to do the trial. So I would say the first thing, if I was a hospital administrator, I would want to make sure that I engaged an expert in that area, whether I, looked to a group like PYA, or whether I hired somebody in that had that expertise to start getting that program mapped out and putting that plan together. So first step is you've got to get at least somebody with the talent and the expertise in there to start navigating the program. And then it comes down to lining up your physicians and getting those first trials in. So talent, physicians, and the actual trials themselves.
Okay. And just I know we've got a couple minutes left, and we'll talk about a tool that we've put together in a minute, but some of the responses to the last polling question were, how do we improve our return on investment? So that's one of the challenges that organizations are having. If you took a look at a service line P&L today, and you were assessing the health of that clinical trials program, what are the areas that you would zero in on to say, here are the things that we would look at, benchmark, and seek to improve if you had to improve your return on investment right away?
Yeah, first thing I would do is I would call it a budget diagnostic, because if you're not setting those budgets up for those clinical trials up front, the rest of it just kind of keeps going downhill. So the critical point is looking at how are you budgeting, and also what's the range that you're getting, because you know, for example, if I see an oncology, a therapeutic oncology study that's $5,000 per patient, that's high red flag, red alert for me, because I'm really looking for maybe 15 to 25,000 as that per patient amount. And so making sure that your budgeting process is capturing at least what it's going to cost you to do the study.
And then to that end, having the ability, because you know what your costs are, right? I think that's one of the challenges we've seen is folks really understanding what their costs are, and then being able, at least for those industry sponsored trials, to be able to go back to the sponsor and negotiate that budget versus just accepting what the budget has been put from the sponsor.
Absolutely.
I mean, do you see a lot of organizations that don't negotiate and could negotiate for cost coverage? And do you see organizations that truly just don't understand their cost structure?
Yeah. Yes.
I'm assuming you see both.
It is. It's the whole, I was going to say, it's the whole gamut, right? So there are some groups that they're just accepting what the sponsor is providing them. And then if there's overages, they know that they're subsidizing that. But many groups are they're pretty well in tune to the fact that they've got to develop the budget, they've got to negotiate, you know, they've got to negotiate the budget. And, you know, and interestingly enough, the sponsors have a cap on what they're looking to pay anyway. And so it's kind of part art and part science, right? So the numbers can take you so far, but then you've got to kind of know how to navigate those negotiations with the sponsors, and you're using the right words and terms, because if you're not, they'll frequently say, oh, well, we don't cover that. That's your cost of doing business, and, you know, those types of things. So I think beyond being able to put a solid budget together and knowing your costs, there's also a technique to negotiating with those sponsors. So it's pretty involved. And research finance specialists and analysts, they're in high demand right now.
Well, I think we've got time for maybe one or two more. So risk areas, that was one of the other items on the poll. And I know you did talk about IRB and FDA and all of that, but what are you seeing from a compliance perspective? Because I know that's an area that we consistently will think about, is what are the top one or two compliance areas that are really right now sort of top of mind? I mean, we know there are a ton of them sort of from beginning to end, but what are you seeing as sort of the top 1 to 2 that, you know, if you had to go back to your compliance department and take a good look at now, just to be sure, what would those be?
The two that come to mind right off the top are the informed consent process. I actually do audit for clinical research on some trials, and the informed consent process is a real big one, right? Because it's not just that document. There's an entire process that you have to go through to document that, to make sure everything's delivered, all of those things. And I see a lot of citations in that realm, and lots of corrective and preventative action plans that get put in place, because after all, human subject safety, right, is the cornerstone document of that is your informed consent. So I would say that consenting and making sure you have very tight SOPs, a form, a process, and that you're documenting it appropriately. So that would be number one. And then on the other end of it, so that's your upfront, up at the beginning, but on the other end of it is the other concern, which is your billing compliance, right? Because if a sponsor is paying you for a particular test and procedure, and you also bill the insurance company for that test or procedure, now you've got a situation of double billing, which I know most folks on this call are familiar with in clinical trials. It's been splashed across the news enough over the years with some, high profile names that have come under fire for actually billing inappropriately in clinical trials. So again, it goes back to making sure you have the right workflow, the right checks and balances, and the right internal audit and steps to avoid any of those. And there's very clear ways that you can do that through all of your documents to make sure things are carrying through and going from, the pass off from department to department takes place to ensure that there's compliance on the billing on the back end. So consent up front and billing on the back end, kind of that sandwich. Now there's a whole bunch of things in between there too, but I think those are the two big ones.
Yep. Well, that sort of brings us to the end. One of the things that we've put together is we're calling it our implementation and expansion readiness checklist. The goal is really to be able to take some of the things that really most of the things Rhonda talked through today and be able to utilize that in your own program to either assess where you've got areas for improvement, again with the goal being the robust clinical trials program that can positively impact a bottom line, in addition to really providing good patient care. But this is a couple pages and walks through the sections that she walked through in the presentation. It should be available in a couple of days on our PYA website. But one of the things, feel free in the meantime, if you've got questions or want to reach out to either Rhonda or myself, we're happy to provide that to you ahead of time. But like I said, it should be, it's literally hot off the press as of yesterday. So just wanted to make sure we put something in your hands to be able to go back and be able to utilize. So I'll close it out first, and then would like Rhonda to say anything she'd like to, but do just want to really thank you, Rhonda, for your time, your expertise. We really do hope this was helpful and at least planted a few seeds to go back and really think about how clinical trials can positively impact your organization. Rhonda, I'll give you the last words and then we'll turn it back over to Trevor.
Well, thank you so much, Tynan and PYA, for having me be a part of this. I was thrilled, and I just want to thank all those that have attended for coming in and listening in, and to feel free to reach out with any questions that we may not have answered. I'm happy to answer any other questions as well. I think we've got our emails out there, so folks could shoot us questions if they wanted. So thank you.
So Trevor, I think that wraps it up for us.
And thank you, Tynan and Rhonda, and thanks to all of our presenters. If you have any questions, their presentations and contact information will be emailed to you along with a recording of today's event. Also, if PYA can provide assistance with audit, tax, compliance, valuation, or physician services, call or email us. You may also visit our website at pyapc.com for more details about our specific areas of expertise or to subscribe to receive PYA insights. Please remember to stay on the line once the webinar disconnects to complete a short survey for CPE credit. Your CPE certificates will be emailed to you in 6 to 8 weeks. On behalf of PYA, thank you for joining us and have a great rest of your day.